There's a drawing, a simple hand-drawn sketch from 1972. In that drawing, there's symbols no one understood at the time. Random words, numbers, a date that seemed far off. That date is 2026, and what was written next to it will send chills down your spine. Benjamin Salari Paravicini wasn't one of those TV prophets selling hope. He was an Argentine artist, a painter, a sculptor, a man who starting in the 1930s began receiving, at least that's what he said, messages he couldn't explain. Messages. They would arrive in a trance-like state. His hand moving before his mind could even interpret what it was doing. Lines appearing on paper as if they already existed somewhere, and he was only tracing them. When the state passed, he would look down and find drawings accompanied by phrases he did not consciously remember writing. He signed them, dated them, and quietly stored them away. He did not promote them, did not announce himself as a seer, and did not build a movement around them. For decades, they remained private, almost like personal notes from a future that had not yet happened. And then slowly people began to notice something unsettling. Events started unfolding in ways that resembled those sketches, not vaguely, not metaphorically, but with eerie parallels. That is when the question emerged, not whether the drawings were strange, but whether they were accurate. Now, before we go deeper, take a second. If you're already feeling curious, go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the Interconnected Zone, and share it with someone who loves exploring mysteries like this. Because once we get deeper into this story, you're going to want someone to talk to about it. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Sometimes the community itself becomes part of the journey. Paravicini called his drawings psychographies. He said they were communications received from a higher intelligence, not necessarily religious in the traditional sense, but conscious. He described them as guidance. He never claimed perfection. He only insisted he was the instrument, not the author. To understand why his 2026 message matters, we have to go back to 1938. Buenos Aires was a cultured city, vibrant and intellectual, and Paravicini was a respected artist working with prominent publications. He was educated, rational, and socially connected. Nothing about him resembled a mystic or a prophet, which is exactly why what happened next is so difficult to dismiss. One evening, alone in his studio, he felt a presence. Not a voice speaking, not a vision in front of his eyes, but a shift in awareness, as if the atmosphere itself had become conscious. His thoughts stopped, and his hand began to draw. He later described the sensation as being awake, but not thinking, aware, but not directing. When the state ended, a complete drawing lay before him along with a sentence that seemed to describe a future moment. That was the first psychograph. Then came hundreds, eventually thousands. He kept them not as proclamations, but as records, like a traveler mapping an unknown continent. And over time, certain images became disturbingly familiar. One drawing depicted 2 tall towers and a catastrophic event connected to them decades before September 11th, 2001. Another described a global disease spreading from the east that would confine humanity to their homes long before the modern pandemic era. Others referenced environmental imbalance and melting polar regions before climate change was even widely discussed. You don't have to accept supernatural explanations to feel the weight of that. The drawings exist. They were dated, and they were specific enough to provoke attention. But one prediction stands apart from the rest. Researchers studying his work refer to it as the threshold message. Paravicini wrote that humanity would face 3 great trials within a short historical period. A worldwide illness, a war centered in Europe, and a crisis of leadership where institutions lose direction and trust collapses. Only after those would the true event begin. Think about that carefully. A global pandemic, a major war in Europe, a deep crisis of political and social confidence worldwide. Whether coincidence or something else, the parallels are hard to ignore. And Paravicini did not say these were the main event. He said they were preparation. According to him, after these tests would come what he called the forced awakening, not a political revolution, not a natural disaster alone, but a transformation in awareness itself. He warned that people would struggle to distinguish truth from illusion, reality from fabrication. He described a time when images deceive, information overwhelms, and humanity questions what is real. Look around today. Deepfakes, artificial intelligence-generated media, conflicting narratives, entire communities living in different realities while sharing the same world. Then he added the detail that makes the story impossible to ignore. He marked the period with a time indicator. The beginning of this shift, he said, would emerge around the year 2026. Right now, pause for a second and tell me honestly in the comments. Do you feel like reality itself has become harder to interpret in the past few years? I read every comment, and your perspective might help someone else understand their own experience, because Paravicini didn't just say something would happen. He said people alive during that moment would be searching for meaning drawn toward answers and forming communities centered around understanding. People looking for explanation would, in his words, find a message when the hour arrives. Which brings us to a strange possibility. The fact that you're watching this video right now might not be random in the symbolic sense he was describing. Not fate in a rigid way, but alignment, curiosity, meeting timing. Stay with me, because in Now, we'll look at the specific 2026 psychograph itself, and what he claimed humanity would be forced to choose between. The specific drawing connected to 2026 is not dramatic at first glance. There are no explosions, no collapsing buildings, no scenes of chaos. Instead, the image is almost peaceful. A horizon line stretches across the page. Above it, something resembling a rising sun. In the foreground, human figures stand facing the light. And beneath that drawing, Paravicini wrote a single sentence. In 26, man will have to choose between two paths that cannot exist together. Two paths that cannot exist together. That line has been debated for decades. And the reason is simple. It doesn't describe an external event. It describes a decision, not a decision made by governments or armies, but by individuals. He did not say humanity would be attacked. He did not say civilization would collapse. He said humanity would choose. Researchers of his work have proposed many interpretations. Some believe the two paths represent technology versus spirituality. Others think it refers to control versus freedom, centralized power versus distributed societies. Some see it geopolitically a shift between competing global systems. But the most persistent interpretation is far more personal and honestly far more unsettling. The two paths are internal states of consciousness. One path is unconscious living distraction, reaction, fear, identity built entirely on external validation and collective narratives. The other path is awareness, deliberate thinking, personal responsibility, compassion, and connection to what Paravicini repeatedly called the source, a deeper level of perception beyond constant noise. He insisted the decision would not be made once, but repeatedly moment by moment in everyday life. Every reaction, every belief adopted without examination. Every action driven by fear would reinforce one path. Every moment of reflection, truth-seeking, and empathy would reinforce the other. And according to his writings, 2026 is the year when circumstances would intensify to the point where neutrality becomes impossible. People would feel pressure, psychological, social, informational, forcing them to decide how they engage with reality. Think about the current environment. Information overload, competing versions of truth, emotional polarization, the struggle to determine what to trust. Many people feel exhausted, not physically but mentally. Paravicini described exactly that: a mental battlefield, a war not for territory but for perception. He wrote that the most decisive conflict of this era would not be fought with weapons. It would be fought with belief. Now, here's something almost nobody talks about when discussing Paravicini. He didn't only describe the event. He described the people who would notice it first. He referred to them in a way scholars later summarized as the prepared ones. Not special in status. Not chosen in a religious sense, but sensitive individuals who would feel out of place in ordinary social patterns, who sense contradictions more strongly than others, who question things instinctively. He said, "These individuals often feel isolated, not because they reject society, but because they perceive layers others ignore." He described them as people who often struggle with meaning. People who can function in daily life, but always feel something is missing. People who experience a persistent intuition that reality is deeper than it appears. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. In fact, write in the comments if you've ever had that feeling that you're participating in life, but also observing it at the same time. You'll be surprised how many others relate. According to Paravicini, these individuals would not be leaders in the traditional sense. They would not form movements or command crowds. Their influence would be quieter. He compared them to sparks, small points of awareness that collectively illuminate a larger space. And here is what he considered their biggest obstacle. Not opposition, not censorship, not societal pressure, self-doubt. He wrote that many who sense deeper meaning would dismiss their own intuition because it conflicts with learned expectations. They would feel compelled to conform to familiar explanations, even when those explanations feel incomplete. The challenge of this era, he said, would be internal. The courage to trust perception without falling into irrationality, to remain open-minded without becoming gullible. In other words, discernment. He believed the awakening would not involve rejecting science or knowledge, but integrating them with awareness. He warned specifically against extremes, blind skepticism, and blind belief. Both, he said, lead to the same outcome, surrendering independent thought, and that connects directly to the mental battlefield he predicted. When information becomes overwhelming, people search for certainty. Certainty becomes attractive even when it is false because it reduces anxiety. Paravicini argued that the real test of this era would be the ability to live with uncertainty without surrendering reasoning or compassion. He even described a psychological state he called the calm center, a mental position where a person observes events without immediate reaction, processes information carefully, and chooses responses consciously instead of emotionally. Not detachment from life, but clarity within it. He suggested that individuals cultivating this state would navigate the coming period far more effectively than those reacting impulsively to every new event. And this is where his prediction becomes less about the future and more about the present. Because the forced awakening, according to him, is not a single dramatic moment. It is an accumulation of realizations. A slow recognition that the world is changing faster than familiar frameworks can explain. Technology accelerates. Social systems shift, institutions transform, and individuals begin asking deeper questions, not just what is happening, but why they are here during it. He wrote something striking in one of his later psychographs. It is not coincidence who lives in the time of change. He believed periods of major transformation tend to coincide with generations capable of navigating them. Not because they are superior, but because their experiences prepare them to adapt. Curiosity, flexibility, and awareness become survival skills, not physical survival, but psychological and social, which leads to a fascinating implication. The 2026 moment is not only an event to witness. It is an invitation to participate consciously in shaping outcomes, at least on the scale of personal influence. Because Paravicini's central idea was this: the future is not fixed, it is responsive. Collective outcomes emerge from countless individual decisions. Paravicini never separated spiritual ideas from real-world events. To him, history and consciousness were intertwined. Political shifts, technological breakthroughs, social instability. These were not isolated developments, but visible symptoms of an underlying transformation. He believed humanity moves through phases, and every few centuries a threshold appears where the way people understand reality itself changes. According to his writings, the period surrounding 2026 would be one of those thresholds. He described a global reshuffling, not simply countries rising or falling, but a rebalancing of influence across the planet. In one psychograph, he drew continents connected by directional arrows and wrote a phrase that has gained attention in recent years. The East will rise when the West doubts itself. He did not frame it as a victory or defeat, but as a transition, a redistribution of confidence and leadership. When societies lose certainty in their own systems, he believed, they begin searching for alternatives and the world reorganizes around new centers of stability. Whether someone views that symbolically or politically, the present moment does feel like a period of redefinition. Alliances shift, economies restructure, global conversations about power, identity, and direction intensify. But Paravicini warned that geopolitical change was only the surface layer. Beneath it, he saw something much larger, a change in how humanity thinks. He wrote that humanity was entering an era where information would become more powerful than physical force. The decisive conflicts, he said, would occur in perception. Control of narrative would matter more than control of territory. He even suggested people would live in overlapping realities formed by the information they consumed. Think about how individuals today can inhabit completely different versions of the world while sharing the same physical environment. News feeds differ. Interpretations differ. Evidence itself is debated. Paravicini described this phenomenon long before digital communication existed, and he warned that the real challenge would not be determining what exists, but determining what to trust. This is why he called it the mental front of conflict. Now, Paravicini connected this mental battlefield directly to technology. He believed humanity would create tools capable of processing knowledge at extraordinary speeds. These tools would assist, but they would also challenge identity. When machines can calculate, compose, predict, and simulate, people begin asking a new question. What remains uniquely human? He wrote that during this period, intellect alone would not be enough. The qualities that would matter most would be awareness, empathy, intuition, and creativity emerging from inner perception rather than external programming. Not the rejection of technology, but the balance of it. He did not fear innovation. He feared imbalance. A civilization developing external capability faster than internal maturity. In his framework, the 20,226 threshold marks the moment humanity notices that imbalance clearly. The moment when progress forces reflection. A society can create powerful systems, but it must also understand itself well enough to guide them wisely. Otherwise, confusion increases rather than decreases. He also described a collective psychological phenomenon he called the rising tide from within. Individuals around the world, regardless of culture or background, would begin questioning inherited assumptions. People would reassess careers, relationships, priorities, and beliefs. Many would feel restlessness they could not easily explain. He emphasized this repeatedly. Not everyone would interpret spiritually, but many would feel compelled to change something about how they lived. Have you experienced that lately? A sense that routines that once felt stable now feel incomplete? If you have, write in the comments. You may think it's personal, but one of the most fascinating aspects of this period is how many people report similar feelings simultaneously. Paravicini suggested this would not be a crisis in the destructive sense. It would feel uncomfortable because it challenges familiarity, but its purpose would be constructive. He compared it to an egg breaking from the inside. From the outside, it looks like damage. From the inside, it is birth. Civilizations, he said, grow through disruption. Stability creates comfort, but disruption creates evolution. The danger is not change itself. The danger is reacting to change, blindly clinging desperately to the past, or rushing recklessly into the new without understanding either. He introduced a concept he called fertile waiting, the ability to remain steady during uncertainty without demanding immediate answers. He believed individuals capable of patience, reflection, and thoughtful response would navigate transformation far better than those driven by panic or blind certainty. This idea connects to something deeply human. We tend to seek immediate conclusions because uncertainty feels threatening. But major transitions rarely provide clarity instantly. They require observation, adaptation, and resilience. According to Parini, the coming period rewards awareness more than prediction. Not knowing every answer, but asking better questions. He even suggested that meaningful coincidences would increase during this time. Encounters, opportunities, and insights appearing when people become attentive enough to notice them. Not miracles in a supernatural sense, but alignment between attention and experience. When individuals actively seek understanding, they begin recognizing patterns previously ignored. He called these the signs of time. The first sign he wrote would be acceleration. People would feel years passing faster than before, knowledge becoming outdated quickly, and social change occurring within months instead of decades. The second sign would be extreme, stronger divisions in opinion, stronger environmental contrasts, greater contrast between cooperation and conflict. The third sign would be personal, a persistent inner call that ordinary distractions no longer satisfy. And the fourth sign would be community, groups forming not around geography, but shared curiosity. People separated by distance, but united by exploration of meaning. That last one is particularly interesting. Communities like this channel, where individuals from different countries and backgrounds gather to discuss ideas, might actually resemble what he described. He insisted that noticing the signs was not enough. Response mattered. Each individual contributes to collective direction through small daily decisions. Honesty instead of convenience. Understanding instead of hostility. Reflection instead of reaction. He called this the lighthouse effect. A lighthouse does not chase ships or control the ocean. It simply shines consistently, and ships navigate accordingly. Individuals who cultivate clarity influence others not through authority, but through presence. And that leads directly to his most hopeful message, and we'll explore why Paravicini believed the 2026 threshold is not a warning about catastrophe, but a rare opportunity, and why he wrote that being alive during this moment may carry meaning far beyond coincidence. Paravicini's final writings carry a very different tone from what people expect when they hear the word prophecy. They are not dominated by fear. They are dominated by responsibility. He did not say humanity was doomed, and he did not promise salvation would simply arrive. He said the outcome depends on awareness. The future, according to him, is not a fixed timeline, but a direction influenced by countless individual choices made in the present moment. In one of his later psychographs, he drew a solitary human figure standing before a horizon that could be interpreted either as a sunrise or a sunset. The ambiguity was intentional. Beneath the image, he wrote a short phrase that has become one of the most discussed lines in all of his work. It is no coincidence you are here now. Think about that carefully. Not destiny in the rigid sense, not predetermination, but relevance. He suggested that major historical transitions tend to coincide with generations capable of perceiving them, not because those people are special in status, but because their questions match the era they inhabit. Curiosity becomes the qualification. Many spiritual traditions across cultures contain similar ideas that certain periods of history call forth individuals who can adapt, question, and reimagine structures that no longer function. Paravicini believed the early 21st century was exactly such a time. The pressure humanity feels, he said, is not merely external. It is internal alignment trying to occur on a collective scale. He warned that people would misinterpret the discomfort of this era as purely crisis. But crisis in his language meant decision point, a turning place. The tension we feel, he wrote, comes from two incompatible ways of living existing simultaneously. One based on fear, control, and reaction. The other based on awareness, cooperation, and deliberate thought. Both cannot dominate at once. Hence, the two paths that cannot exist together. And here is where his prediction becomes deeply personal. The 2026 moment is not something happening somewhere else. It is not confined to governments, institutions, or headlines. It plays out inside individuals first. Every time a person chooses understanding instead of hostility, clarity instead of impulse, or patience instead of panic, they reinforce one of those paths. Every time fear overrides awareness, the other path strengthens. He insisted the transformation of civilization would not be led primarily by leaders or systems, but by ordinary people adjusting how they think and respond. Small changes repeated across millions of lives create large-scale outcomes. In modern terms, we might call it emergent behavior. Paravini simply called it consciousness shaping reality. He also clarified something important. Awakening, in his view, did not mean withdrawing from society or rejecting everyday responsibilities. It meant engaging with life more consciously, listening carefully before reacting, questioning information before spreading it, acting ethically even when no one is watching. Not dramatic gestures, but consistent awareness. He believed the greatest danger of this period was not technology, politics, or conflict. It was distraction, the endless noise preventing reflection. A person overwhelmed by constant stimulation cannot observe clearly, and without observation, meaningful choice disappears. That is why he emphasized the calm center we discussed earlier. The capacity to pause, pause before believing, pause before sharing, pause before reacting. That pause, he said, is where freedom exists. Because once you can observe your reaction, you can choose it. And choice is exactly what his 2026 message revolves around. Not prediction, but participation. He even wrote that during the threshold period, individuals who act with sincerity and awareness would notice subtle changes in their lives. Opportunities appearing unexpectedly, encounters with people who share similar questions, moments of clarity emerging at precisely needed times. Not supernatural intervention, but increased alignment between attention and experience. When perception sharpens, reality appears to respond. He described this as the universe becoming an ally to conscious intention. Now, let me ask you directly, has anything recently pushed you to question your direction? A job that no longer feels meaningful, relationships that feel shallow, a persistent sense you were meant to do something different, but you cannot yet define it? According to Paravini, that discomfort is not a malfunction. It is a signal. Write it in the comments if you felt that lately. Sometimes just expressing it helps someone else realize they are not alone. He believed humanity is entering a phase where external structures will change rapidly: economies, communication, and social organization. But the real transformation will be internal. The skills required for the future, he wrote, are not only technical, but psychological attention, discernment, empathy, and the courage to think independently while remaining compassionate. And this leads to the core of his message. His psychographs were never meant to be a timetable of events. They were a map of awareness. Predictions were not the destination. They were the pointer directing people to look at themselves. Every generation faces change, but occasionally history accelerates. When acceleration happens, individuals either cling harder to old certainty or develop deeper understanding. Paravitini believed 2026 marks such acceleration, a convergence of technological capability, social transition, and personal introspection. You can experience that moment passively or consciously. He compared it again to a lighthouse. A lighthouse does not command ships. It simply shines steadily. People who cultivate clarity become stabilizing influences for others. Families calm around them. Conversations become more thoughtful. Conflicts resolve more easily. Not because they preach, but because awareness itself changes interaction. He was not asking people to predict the future. He was asking them to embody a better one in the present. And this is why his final implication is so powerful. The question of 2026 is not what will happen to the world. The question is what kind of participant you will be in it. Observer or contributor, reactor or responder, confused or curious. Because the future, he insisted, is not a destination we arrive at. It is something we are continuously constructing through perception and action. So if this video sparked reflection, don't ignore that feeling. continue exploring. Talk about it. Share perspectives. Awareness grows through conversation, and that's exactly why this channel exists. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure you subscribe to the Interconnected Zone and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Like the video, share it with someone who would genuinely think about it. And if you'd like to directly support the work, consider using super thanks. You can also select the hype option to help push this video to others searching for meaning right now. And if you want to go deeper with this community, consider becoming a member. It helps keep these long-form explorations alive. I'd really like to hear your thoughts. So, tell me in the comments, do you think the changes happening now are random or part of a larger pattern humanity is beginning to notice? Thank you for spending this time here. Until the next video, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and remember, sometimes the most important predictions are not about the world ahead, but about the awareness we choose to carry into it.